She thought she had found her soulmate, but he was twice her age. What began as a forbidden fairy tale turned into a twisted web of lies, betrayal, and obsession. And when the truth came out, nothing would ever be the same. She was 21, bright-eyed, still carrying the kind of reckless dreams that belong to people who haven't yet been broken by the world. She worked afternoons at a tiny cafe by the marina, serving lattes to boatmen and tourists who never bothered to ask her name. Most days were a blur of ringing cups and clattering plates. But the day Richard walked in, everything slowed. He was older, much older. Mid-50s, salt and pepper hair brushed neatly back, a navy blazer that seemed too sharp for the sleepy harbor. He didn't belong in her cafe. He looked like he belonged in the glossy magazines stacked by the counter. Powerful, untouchable, dangerous. Sophia noticed the way the air changed. Customers turned to look, even if they pretended not to. He had that kind of presence, the kind that made rooms bend around him. And when his eyes landed on her, sharp, piercing blue eyes that carried decades of stories, she felt a strange heat crawl up her neck. "Americano. Black," he said simply, voice smooth but commanding. It was nothing, just a drink order. And yet Sophia's hands trembled as she reached for the cup. She didn't understand why. But you and I know, sometimes the smallest things carry the weight of everything to come. At first, she dismissed it. He was just another customer, another face in the crowd. But he kept coming back, always in the late afternoons, always alone, always choosing the corner table by the window where the light caught the silver streaks in his hair, and always ordering from her. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. By the third visit, Richard smiled. Not a full smile, just the hint of one. The kind of smile that says, "I know something you don't." "Do you study or just work here?" he asked. His voice was velvet dipped in steel. Sophia hesitated. She hated when men asked personal questions. But with him, she answered without thinking. "I study literature. University nearby." "Ah," he said softly, leaning back in his chair. "That explains the way you look at people." She frowned. "Excuse me?" "You watch. Carefully. Most people don't." He sipped his coffee, never breaking eye contact. "It makes you interesting." Sophia blushed. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not as a barista, not as a student, not as a young woman barely making sense of herself, but as an interesting young woman. Days turned into weeks. Richard's visits became routine, an unspoken ritual. Sophia started to anticipate them, brushing her hair differently, choosing lipstick on days he might show. She told herself it was nothing, just curiosity. But curiosity is how fire spreads. And Richard knew exactly what he was doing. One evening, when the cafe was nearly empty, he left a note with his payment. Just a folded slip of paper, his handwriting precise and elegant. Dinner? Friday, 8 o'clock. The Harbor Club. No phone number, no signature, just expectation. Sophia's heart thudded in her chest as she stared at it. She knew what this meant. He wasn't asking. He was inviting her into his world, a world of sharp suits and expensive wine and secrets she wasn't ready for. And here's the thing. She could have thrown the note away. She could have laughed it off. But deep down, part of her had already decided. Friday night, Sophia stood outside the Harbor Club, her thrift store dress trembling under the glow of chandeliers inside. She almost didn't go in, almost turned around. But then the doors opened and Richard appeared. He wasn't just older. He was refined, a wolf dressed in silk. He offered his arm as though it was the most natural thing in the world, and she slipped her hand into it without protest. Dinner was intoxicating. The restaurant buzzed with the hum of the wealthy, but all Sophia could hear was Richard's voice. He asked about her classes, her dreams, her childhood. He listened, really listened, like every word she spoke was a secret worth holding. And when the dessert plates were cleared, he leaned in and said, "You know they'll judge us. They'll whisper. They'll call me names. And they'll call you worse. Do you care?" Her breath caught. The rational part of her screamed, "Yes." But what slipped from her lips was, "No." Richard's smile widened, wolfish. "Good. Here's where I pause and ask you. Imagine you're 21. You're barely starting life. And suddenly, someone who carries the weight of decades, money, power, desire, focuses all of it on you. Would you walk away? Or would you fall?" Sophia fell. Hard. Their secret romance ignited quickly. Coffee dates turned into late-night drives. Simple touches turned into lingering hands into stolen kisses in the dark. Sophia felt alive, electrified, like she'd been asleep her whole life and only now awakened. But passion never comes without shadows. Because sometimes when Richard's phone buzzed late at night, he silenced it. Sometimes when Sophia asked about his past, his eyes went cold. And sometimes when he looked at her, it wasn't with tenderness, but with ownership. She noticed. Of course she noticed. But when you're young and in love, or what you think is love, you ignore the warning signs. The first time Richard kissed her, it was behind the cafe after closing. The world was quiet, except for the hum of street lights and her own pounding heart. He cupped her face with a hand that felt both protective and possessive. And when their lips met, it wasn't gentle. It was claiming. Sophia melted into it, and for a moment, she forgot everything else. But later, lying awake in her small apartment, she thought about his words over dinner. "They'll judge us. They'll whisper." And she wondered, what was he hiding? Weeks turned into months. Sophia's friends grew distant. "He's too old," they said. "He's using you." But she brushed them off. They didn't see what she saw, the tenderness in private, the gifts, the way he made her feel special. But one night, after Richard dropped her off, she caught her reflection in the mirror. Red lipstick smudged, hair tangled, eyes wide. And for the first time, she whispered to herself, "Do I even know who he really is?" The answer came sooner than she expected. Because one evening, after Richard left his coat at her apartment, she reached into the pocket to hang it up. And there, tucked in the inner lining, was something she wasn't supposed to see. A silver locket. Old, scratched, clearly cherished. Inside, a photograph. Not of her, of a woman, elegant, smiling, and beside her, 2 children. Sophia froze, the air sucked from her lungs. Her hand shook as she snapped the locket shut. Richard wasn't just older. He wasn't just mysterious. He was a husband, a father, a man living 2 lives. And she was the dangerous secret he needed to keep. Sophia thought she had fallen into the arms of her savior. But that night, staring at the locket in her hands, she realized the truth. She had walked straight into the lion's den, and escaping would be far harder than falling in. Sophia sat frozen, the locket digging into her palm, her pulse hammering in her ears. The smiling woman in the photo seemed to stare back at her, mocking her, whispering a truth Sophia could no longer deny. Richard had a wife, a family. Her stomach twisted. She replayed every look, every touch, every word he'd spoken. They'll judge us. They'll whisper. He hadn't been warning her about strangers on the street. He'd been preparing her for the shame of being his secret. For a moment, she wanted to hurl the locket across the room. Pretend she hadn't seen it. Pretend she could still be the girl who felt special, chosen. But no amount of pretending could erase what she now knew. When Richard knocked on her door that night, she hid the locket under a pillow and forced a smile. He stepped inside with his usual confidence, carrying a bottle of wine like nothing was wrong. But as he leaned down to kiss her cheek, Sophia turned her face away ever so slightly. And in that small motion, the balance between them shifted. Over dinner in her cramped apartment, Richard was his usual charming self, asking about her exams, her dreams of writing. But Sophia barely heard him. She was watching his every gesture, listening for lies in every word. Finally, she couldn't hold it in. "Richard," she said quietly, staring at her plate. "Do you love anyone else?" The fork in his hand stilled. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. "What kind of question is that?" he asked smoothly, but there was an edge beneath it. "Do you?" she pressed, her voice trembling. He set the fork down, leaned back and studied her. His eyes were ice. "Sophia, you're young. You don't understand how complicated life can be." Her heart sank. He hadn't denied it. The next morning, Sophia avoided the cafe. She couldn't bear to face him. Instead, she walked aimlessly through the marina, staring at the boats rocking gently in the harbor. The world seemed too calm, too normal, as though it didn't know her own was falling apart. Her phone buzzed. A message. From Richard. "You're mine. Don't let doubts ruin this." It wasn't love. It was possession. The words sank like stones in her chest. But here's the cruel truth about forbidden love. Even when you know it's dangerous, walking away feels impossible. And Sophia wasn't ready. Yet. A week passed before she saw him again. She had avoided the cafe, ignored his messages, tried to bury herself in schoolwork. But Richard wasn't the kind of man who accepted silence. He appeared on campus, waiting near the library steps like he belonged there. Students turned to look, whispering. Sophia froze when she saw him. "Sophia," he called, his voice low but firm. "We need to talk." She shook her head, clutching her books tighter. "Not here." But he was already walking toward her, his presence like a storm cloud. That night, against her better judgment, she met him. They sat in his sleek black car parked by the water, the city lights flickering on the waves. "I should end this," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "You won't," Richard said calmly, his hand closing over hers. "Because you feel what I feel. And you can't deny it." And in that moment, as much as she hated herself for it, she couldn't. His touch still set her on fire. His eyes still made her feel like the only person in the world. She leaned into him, and the kiss that followed was desperate, hungry, tinged with anger. Love and hate collided in the dark interior of his car, and Sophia knew she was already too deep. But passion never stays hidden. One afternoon, Sophia spotted Richard at the cafe again. Only this time, he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, graceful, elegant, with dark hair swept into a chignon. She was laughing at something Richard said, her hand brushing his sleeve like it had done 1,000 times before. Sophia's blood ran cold. The Locketts photo had come to life before her eyes. This was his wife. And Richard? He caught Sophia staring from behind the counter. His smile didn't falter. His eyes flicked to her for just a second, cool and warning. It was a game now, one he controlled. That night, Sophia confronted him again. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "She's beautiful. She's everything I'm not." Richard's expression hardened. "She's nothing like you." "Then why are you still with her?" His silence was answer enough. Sophia shoved the locket into his chest, her hands shaking. "I'm not your secret. I won't be your little escape." But Richard didn't flinch. Instead, he took her wrists gently but firmly, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You're not my secret, Sophia. You're my obsession, and that is far more dangerous." Her breath caught, terror and desire tangling inside her. Because in that moment, she realized she wasn't in control. She never had been. Sophia had stepped into a story she thought she was writing with her heart. But Richard was the author now. And every word he wrote dragged her deeper into a love that was anything but pure. A love that was turning into a trap. Sophia once believed forbidden love was thrilling, dangerous in the way of secret kisses and hushed phone calls. But now, as winter crept across the marina and the days grew shorter, the thrill had turned into something else. Fear. Fear of being seen. Fear of being exposed. Fear of what Richard might do if she tried to leave. Because leaving him wasn't simple anymore. Not after months of tangled lies, of stolen nights, of whispered promises she half believed. He had become part of her life like a shadow, always there, even when she tried to walk away. And shadows, as you know, only grow darker the longer you avoid the light. The first crack came one Sunday morning. Sophia was walking home from the library when she saw Richard across the street. He wasn't alone. His wife was with him. At first, Sophia froze, praying he wouldn't notice her. But then something worse happened. He did. And for the briefest second, his eyes locked on hers. He didn't flinch. He didn't look guilty. Instead, he smiled at his wife, tucked her arm into his, and crossed the street in the opposite direction. It was deliberate. A warning. You don't exist when she's around. Sophia's chest tightened, her hands trembling. That night when Richard came to see her, she refused to open the door. She sat in silence as he knocked once, twice, then walked away. But he returned the next night, and the next, until finally she gave in and let him in. Inside her apartment, Richard poured himself a glass of whiskey like he owned the place. "You're avoiding me," he said simply. "You paraded her in front of me." Sophia spat, tears in her voice. "Like I'm nothing." "Like I don't matter." Richard set down the glass, walked toward her slowly, and touched her cheek. "You matter more than anyone, Sophia. That's why you're dangerous to me." She pulled away. "Dangerous? I'm not the one living two lives." His eyes darkened. "You think I'm happy with her? That marriage is a performance. You're the real thing. But the world wouldn't understand. They'd call it wrong. They'd destroy us." Sophia shook her head, desperate. "Then let me go." His jaw tightened, his voice a whisper like a blade. "I can't." The weeks blurred into a suffocating routine. Richard's wife began to notice his late nights. His children grew suspicious. Sophia became more isolated. Her friends gone, her studies crumbling. It wasn't a romance anymore. It was a cage. And every time Sophia tried to pull away, Richard pulled harder. One evening, during yet another argument, Sophia finally screamed, "You're going to lose everything. Your wife, your kids, because of me." Richard's voice cracked for the first time. "I already have." And for a moment she saw it, the exhaustion in his eyes, the lines of regret carved deep into his face. He wasn't just a predator. He was a man unraveling, desperate to hold on to the one thing he thought gave him life again. But desperation can be just as dangerous as control. The breaking point came one snowy night when Sophia went to the cafe to pick up her final paycheck before quitting. She wanted out. She wanted distance. But as she walked in, she froze. Richard was there. Not with his wife. Not with his children. But with his lawyer. Papers spread across the table. Voices hushed but urgent. Sophia's stomach sank as she caught fragments of words. Divorce. Settlement. Custody. Her hand shook as she dropped her apron on the counter and slipped back out into the cold. Richard was dismantling his entire life. For her? That night he came to her again, his eyes alight with something feverish. "It's happening," he said, gripping her shoulders. "I told her. I told them. I'm leaving. We'll be together now." Openly, Sophia's breath caught. This was everything she thought she wanted, wasn't it? To be chosen. To be the only one. But as she looked at him, at the storm in his eyes, at the wreckage of the life he was burning down, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. Because this wasn't love anymore. It was obsession. And obsession destroys. Sophia once dreamed of being his escape. But now, as Richard's world collapsed around him, she realized the terrible truth. She wasn't his salvation. She was his ruin. And if she didn't find a way out soon, she might go down with him. Richard hadn't called for 3 days. No midnight knocks, no demanding texts. For most women, that silence might have been relief. Relief that he had finally left her. But for Sophia, it felt like waiting for a storm she knew was coming. And it did. When he finally appeared at her door, he was unshaven, his hair unkempt, his coat streaked with snow. His eyes burned with feverish intensity. "It's over," he said hoarsely. "She knows. The papers are in motion. I left everything behind. For you." Sophia's chest twisted. His words should have thrilled her, but instead they struck like chains. His obsession wasn't love. It was conquest. And now that he had destroyed his world for her, he expected her to be the prize. The weeks that followed were suffocating. Richard shadowed her every move. He sent flowers that filled her small apartment until the scent made her nauseous. He left notes on her car windshield, messages that read, "You're my reason to keep breathing." Richard isolated her completely from her parents. He somehow convinced her to let her friends go when her friends had shown their disapproval for the relationship. Sophia stopped answering her parents' calls. She quit her job at the cafe to avoid the whispers. She skipped classes because professors asked too many questions. Slowly, she was dissolving, and Richard only clung harder. The breaking point came at his new apartment. The place was immaculate, gleaming with expensive furniture he'd bought in haste, as though material things could replace what he'd lost. He opened wine, smiling at her with unsettling calm. "We're free now, Sophia," he said. "Finally. Free to live without guilt. without shame. Just us. Sophia's fingers trembled on the stem of her glass. Free, she whispered. You've abandoned your children. Your wife hates you. Everyone whispers about me. And you think this is freedom? Richard leaned forward, eyes blazing. None of that matters. You are my freedom, my salvation, my everything. His voice cracked as he reached for her hand, gripping it too tightly. Don't you understand? Without you, I'm nothing. Nothing. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but they weren't tears of love. They were of terror. In that moment, she understood. She wasn't his partner. She was his obsession, his undoing. The final straw came when Richard, trembling, pressed a small black box into her hands. Inside was a ring. Not elegant, not thoughtful, just large, expensive, heavy. Say yes, he begged, his voice almost breaking. Say yes and prove I didn't lose everything for nothing. Sophia looked at the ring, then at the man before her. His face drawn, his eyes wild, his desperation consuming him whole. And for the first time, she saw her future if she stayed. A life where she would always be his cage, his addiction, his excuse for ruin. Her voice shook, but it was steady enough. Richard, I can't do this. Not anymore. He froze, the ring box still between them. Then slowly he closed it, his hand trembling. His jaw clenched as if holding back a scream. You're leaving me, he whispered. After everything I gave up. Sophia's tears spilled. Because love isn't supposed to destroy. And all you've done is destroy. Richard stared at her for a long, unbearable moment. Then he let the box fall onto the table, the sound sharp and final. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked into the snow, disappearing into the night. Sophia collapsed onto the couch, her breath ragged. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was salvation. For the first time in months, she felt the faint pulse of freedom. Sophia learned that obsession wears many masks, sometimes as romance, sometimes as devotion. But when love demands you sacrifice yourself, your future, your very soul, can it still be called love? Or is it simply another name for ruin?